Okay, so now what I want to talk to you guys about for a little bit is research that we've done in my lab on these questions, specifically on role play and theater and how it might be related to children's social skills. So I call this sort of work that I do the puzzle of role play and theater for children's social skills, because every time I do a research study on theater and the effects of theater, we have slightly different results. And the reason why we have slightly different results is because theater is not just one thing and social skills are not just one thing. If you think about the hypothesis that acting classes cause social and emotional learning, right? If you put that forward as a hypothesis, acting classes and involvement of acting classes cause social and emotional learning. That is one statement. But there's a whole bunch of other questions that derive from that one statement. So for example, which activities within theater? Is it all of theater class? Is it just the warm-up? Is it just reading the script? Is it just performing for the audience? Is it just doing the improv games? Theater class is not one thing. It's not a monolith. It's lots of different components. The next question is, which skills? Social and emotional skills are not just one thing, right? You have compassion, which is feeling sorry for somebody. You have altruism, which is helping somebody out at a cost to yourself. You have empathy, which is understanding somebody else's emotional state and feeling that emotion in yourself. You have sympathy, which is feeling bad for somebody else, but not necessarily acting on it. You have theory of mind, which is understanding somebody else's beliefs, desires, intentions, and knowledge. You have emotion understanding for the self, which is what am I feeling in this moment. You have emotion regulation, which is how I can change what I'm feeling in this moment. All of those things, and I could keep listing off ones for like the next 15 minutes, all of those things are considered social and emotional skills that need to be learned. So when you ask the hypothesis, or when you claim the hypothesis, acting classes cause social emotional learning, you have to ask yourself, well, what do I mean by social emotional learning? Which skills am I talking about within SEL? This then leads to a series of other questions. For example, for whom? Which populations of people? Which types of people? Do you have to have some sort of personality profile before you can take the acting classes? Do you have to have taken English language classes before you take drama? Do you have to understand something about television and movies before you can take acting classes that could be effective for social and emotional learning? How might acting classes cause social and emotional learning? What kind of mechanism, either biologically or behaviorally? Whoa, I'm going to trip and fall over my own feet. Which kind of mechanism, either biologically or behaviorally, could be causing this difference? Why might this be happening? What sort of abilities have to be fulfilled in order for this to be happening? Why might those abilities be the ones that have to be fulfilled? When might this be happening? Does it matter if you take the acting class in the morning or at night? Does it matter if you're 4 years old when you take it, or 12 years old when you take it, or 19 years old when you take it? Does it matter if you take it once for a year, or do you have to take it 3 times a week for 3 years in order for this to happen, right? So the simple hypothesis of acting classes cause social emotional learning is actually not so simple, and there's lots of different components that go into it. So in order to try and answer this question, my lab does a wide range of different kinds of studies. And we work in everything from real-world observation, where we go out to acting classes across the United States and just stand in the corner and film them as they're happening, and then bring those films home and analyze them for various social and emotional skills. We also do program evaluations, where we go and we work with the kids as they're involved in the acting classes and look over the course of time what changes and describe what changes over the course of time. We also do field experiments, which I'm about to explain to you, where we go out into schools or into environments and do experiments in which we assign kids to engage in different kinds of activities and see what that does. And then we also do experiments in the lab. So I have a lab in David King Hall in the basement. It looks like a preschool classroom. And we bring kids into the lab and work with them there on different kinds of acting and pretending activities and see what that does for their social and emotional learning. So what I'm going to present to you is one study that we did a few years ago, in which we went out into a school and randomly assigned kids to get either theater activities or 2 other kinds of activities. So this is a random control, field intervention. So first of all, what does random mean in random control? You know? Yes? Exactly. The children did not pick which group they were in. We picked randomly by literally drawing numbers out of a hat in order to randomize them to group. What does control mean in random control? Yeah?
It's the basis, like the group that you will use to look at other groups.
Exactly, that we have comparison groups, right? We're not just looking at change in one group, we're comparing change in one group to change in other groups. Field means that I did not bring them into the lab in order to do this, but I did it in the context in which they already were. So we went and worked in the preschool program that the kids were already enrolled in. And then intervention means that we looked and changed over course of time the kinds of activities that the kids were involved in, right? So they weren't just doing business as usual. We intervened on their daily activities in order to introduce something new that we thought might have an effect. We worked with 5-year-olds. And the reason we worked with 5-year-olds is because it's really hard to do a randomized controlled field intervention once you get any much older than 5-year-olds. If I were to say that a third of you absolutely have to take 8 weeks of acting classes right now, regardless of whether or not you're interested in it, would that get a thumbs up or a thumbs down? Thumbs down from most people, right? If I told you you absolutely had to do a Lego intervention, meaning you had to play with Legos 3 times a week for a half an hour each time for the next 8 weeks, and you got no choice in what you were building at all, thumbs up or thumbs down? Thumbs down, right? So this is why we do research with young children, in a way, because kids have both more diffuse interests, meaning kids are more interested in lots of different things when they're young because everything's a learning opportunity for a kid, right? So you give them Legos, great. You take them to an acting class, cool. You read them a story, woohoo, right? Kids are interested in all of these different things regardless of which activity you're providing them, right? It gets harder and harder to force somebody to do something as they get older. So that's why we worked with very young children. It's also a lot easier to convince teachers of very young children to let me come in and have their kids do something different because the curriculum is a little more open when you're a little bit younger, right? When you get into high school, you have a very strict curriculum that you have to follow for educational standards. When you're very young, the curriculum is more play-based and more open. So what we did was we created 3 parallel interventions. These interventions lasted for 8 weeks. It was a half an hour at a time for 3 times per week. So over the course of the summer, they got 12 hours of the intervention. We also tested the kids before they started the intervention and after they ended the intervention. And within each classroom, the classroom was divided into groups. So part of the classroom got 1 intervention, part of the classroom got a second, and part of the classroom got a third. So the 3 interventions were drama games, block play, and story time. And the reason we had these control conditions was because we were trying to break down the different elements of drama games in order to control for what might be unique, causally implicated, and mechanistic within that group. So drama games yes? We absolutely had to get the parents' permission. So in order to conduct a research study like this, you actually have to get permission at a bunch of different levels. So I had to get permission from the Department of Education School Board for New York City. Then I had to get permission from the Head Start company that was running that preschool in New York City. Then I had to get permission from the principal of each school. Then I had to get permission from each teacher in each classroom. Then I had to get permission from each parent for each child. In order to do that, I had to translate the consent form, right, the form that the parents would sign, into Mandarin, Cantonese, Spanish, Urdu, and Farsi, because this is New York City, so everybody speaks a different language, which is awesome because it meant that our kids were coming from all sorts of different backgrounds and cultures in order to enter into our experiment. And then each day, we got a positive yes from each child to participate in the intervention by having them stick a sticker on a piece of paper. If you want to participate today, put your sticker over here. If you don't want to participate today, put your sticker over there, and we will take you to a different activity. So we got consent from school board, schools, locations, teachers, parents, and children before we conducted any research from anybody. Stuff's expensive. Takes a long time. Okay, so we had groups interacting across all three conditions. Groups of 4 interacting in the drama games and the block play. We had a bunch of different Lego builds that the kids had to build each day. And then groups of 4 listening to stories. We had guidance. So in the drama games, kids were getting guidance through different games and emotions. For example, we played a game called Emotion Ball. Emotion Ball is when you hold an imaginary ball in your hand. Everybody holds an imaginary ball in your hand. Now I want you to hold it as if it's heavy. Now I want you to hold it as if it's really light and trying to fly out of your hands. Now I want you to hold it as if it's wiggly. Now I want you to hold it as if it's sad. Now I want you to hold it as if it's calm but happy. Right? So that's an example of a drama game that we would play with a kid that had guidance through the games and the emotions of the different moments. There was also guidance for building and placing blocks, but not really any discussions of emotion, and guided reading with questions through a book, a series of books that we had for the kids. We also controlled for narrative and character. So there were narratives and characters in some of the games. So for example, we played a hat game where we had 3 kids come up on stage. Everybody got a different hat. And then you had to act as if somebody who would wear that hat. So a fireman hat, police hat, cowboy hat, princess crown, etc., etc. We had no narratives or characters in the block play, and we had narrative and character in the books. We also had emotions in some of the games. No emotions in the block play, and emotions in some of the books. So you can see here, for each of the control conditions, there's something that's similar to the drama games and something that's different from the drama games. But all of this added up to what we were hypothesizing was the most important point, which was embodiment. So for the drama games, children were embodying emotions and characters, right? So I want everybody to close your eyes and put your attention in your right foot. And feel your right foot. Now I want you to shift your right foot as if you are the most powerful person in this room. You are the most important and most powerful person in this room. How does your right foot feel different? Now I want you to imagine your right foot as if your favorite person in the whole world is about to walk through that door. What would your right foot be doing right now if your favorite person in the whole world was about to walk through the door to the classroom? All right, go ahead and open your eyes. That's an example of embodiment, right? That's an example of taking a mental state and physicalizing it out. That kind of thing happened in the drama games, but did not happen in the block building and did not happen in the story time because the kids were just sitting passively and listening. So for us, thinking about social and emotional learning, we hypothesized that the embodiment of emotions and the embodiment of characters was the mechanistic, the causal, the key component that would be leading to any outcomes we saw for these kids. We tested these kids before the 8 weeks of the intervention and then again after the 8 weeks of the intervention in individual testing sessions for all 97 children with a research assistant that they had never met before and who didn't know what the condition was that they were in. So this was a double-blind experimental testing protocol pre- and post-intervention. We tested them on a variety of social and emotional outcomes. The first one we tested them on was theory of mind. So theory of mind is the understanding of other person's mental, emotional, knowledge, and belief states. It's most often tested through questions like the Sally Ann task. So this is a task in which this is Sally, Sally has a basket, and this is Ann, and Ann has a box. Sally has a marble, she puts it in her basket, and then Sally goes for a walk. Ann, I don't know why, comes and takes Sally's marble, takes it out of the box, and takes it out of the basket where Ann had Let me start over. Sally goes out for a walk. Anne takes the marble out of the basket where Sally had put it and moves it into the box. And then Sally comes back. Where is Sally going to look for her marble?
In the basket.
Why is Sally looking in the basket for her marble?
Because that's where she left.
That's where she left it. That's where she thinks it is. She does not know that Anne moved her marble. So Sally has a different representational understanding. The content in her mind is different than the reality of the world. And the ability to understand that that can happen, right? You can have a mental state that's not perfectly reflective of the world, is a developmental understanding that develops over the first 4 years of life, called theory of mind, that children gain. We also had children engage in a task called the dictator task, in which we gave them a bunch of sparkly stickers and told them they had to give some of them away to somebody else, and we gave them a little envelope to put some of those stickers in. And then we had different tasks in which the research experimenters kept hurting themselves and dropping things. So people would clip their fingers in the clipboard, bang their knees against the table, they would shift their chair and hit themselves with it, they would drop cans of pencils onto the ground, they would drop piles of paper onto the ground, and we filmed every single one of these tests to look at how the kids reacted. Did they freeze? Did they cry? Did they help? Did they ask? Did they engage with the material? Did they engage with the person, right? So all of these are measures of prosociality and understanding of other people. We then also measured the children's own engagement with their own emotions. First, by looking at distress response behaviors. So how much did they respond when somebody else clipped their finger or fell down or dropped a bunch of papers on the floor? And then we did a Berkeley puppet interview for emotional response agreement. So this is a pretty standard way to test young children. I have one puppet that when they see somebody cry, they get totally overwhelmed and they have to go hide. And I have another puppet that when they see somebody cry, they want to go help them and ask them how they're doing. Which one is more like you? And then the children pick which puppet. And we have 22 different sentences, and the children have to pick which one they're more like. We also did a social interaction observation system, which is basically filming every moment of the intervention and then coding it for different kinds of behaviors. So were the children helping each other? Were they hurting each other? Were they not engaging with each other? This is about 2,000 hours worth of video that we filmed and then coded. It took a year. We found absolutely no effect of the intervention on understanding of other people or feeling their emotions. It was pretty devastating, but experiments are experiments, and they fail a lot. So our drama game intervention did not affect children's engagement with other people. However, it did affect their own emotional control. So what you have here is the control groups on the left side, and the dramatic pretend play group on the right side. And then the scale is how much personal distress did the children show at the end of the intervention compared to the beginning of the intervention. The dramatic pretend play group showed significantly less distress at the end of the intervention compared to the beginning than the control group did. This was true both for their behavioral distress when bad things happened in that experimental room and for their self-report of how much distress they showed in response to their environment. So, what does this tell us? This tells us that transferring skills from inside a dramatic pretend play intervention to outside world experiences is not a one-to-one correspondence. Instead, we have what I think of and what's talked about in the literature as a developmental cascade. Meaning, if you are really upset about something that's going on in your own life and you're feeling totally overwhelmed by your own emotions, it's pretty hard to feel sympathy for somebody else. It's pretty hard to help somebody else when they're going through something difficult if you are experiencing tragedy in yourself. The emotional control and regulation, the feeling of being in yourself and being grounded, is the thing that enables us to then be altruistic and compassionate towards others. That's an immediate process in adults, but for kids, they have to learn it developmentally. So the ability to regulate your own emotions comes first developmentally, and then later in development are you able to engage with other people's emotions. And that's what we're seeing here. Our 4, 5-year-olds are learning how to regulate their own emotions, but they haven't yet gotten to the stage where they're being pretty good about engaging with other people's emotions. This leads me to talk about theater and engaging in theater games as learning different tools that you can place in your toolbox. Depending on the game and depending on the exercise, the toolbox is different, and each child takes their own toolbox to use out there in the real world. However, all of these tools have something to do with emotions, right? And the more you can learn about your emotions, the more emotion words you have, the more emotional abilities you have, the better able you are to regulate them and to understand them in other people. And I think that's one thing that theater is really gaining for kids. So I'm going to leave it there, I think. That's my contact information. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. And I know we have a few more minutes for questions or feedback. Thank you, guys. I think we got time for 2 quick questions. So who's got a question? Everyone's like, it's week 13. Yes?
Did you work with the kids personally, or did you just analyze the video that was brought back to you from the researchers?
I trained the research assistants, and then the research assistants went out and worked with the kids. It was actually quite important that I did not work with the kids because I already had a hypothesis about what was going to happen. I trained the research assistants in how to run the intervention, but I did not tell them what the intervention was about until it was over. I also trained the research assistants to do all the testing, but I did not tell them what the intervention was that they were testing for until it was over. So in that way, you keep blindness, right? Everybody's heard of like double blind and single blind trials for medicine. This is behavioral blindness, where the people doing the testing don't know what the intervention is, and the people doing the intervention don't know what the kids are being tested on. And that keeps the experimental rigor as clean as it possibly can. So I sat in my office and people came back and forth to me all day to talk about what was happening, but I didn't make any changes at all, and I didn't interact with the kids.
Because you wouldn't want to impose your view of...
Exactly. We wanted to make sure that the kids didn't know what I was thinking would happen to them, and that the testers didn't know what I was thinking would happen as a result. Yeah?
What are some things that they told the people to make the puppets do? Like, what did the puppets do?
So the puppets, it was a script, right, that the testers followed, right? So the puppets had either, in every vignette, there was one puppet that got totally overwhelmed and couldn't handle the emotions of the situation, and another puppet that could handle the emotions and therefore could act in some way, right? So when I see somebody who has a cookie and I want it, I run and I grab the cookie and I get it, right? Or if I see someone who has a cookie and I want it, I ask them if they'd be willing to share. Which one is more like you? Right? So one of those is an emotionally controlled response. I ask if you want to share. And one of those is an emotionally uncontrolled response. I run and I grab it. Right? When I see somebody who's really angry and punching a pillow, I run and I punch the pillow with them. If I see someone who's really angry and punching a pillow, I ask them if they're okay. Right? So one of them is a pro-social response, asking if they're okay. The other is an emotional contagion response, right? They're angry, so I'm punching the pillow too. So this is a standardized measure in psychology for emotional responsiveness in this age group of kids. So it's been run on many, many kids, so it has reliability. Lots of different kids have done it, and it's also valid because it's related back to emotional response behaviors. Other questions? I want to let you close out the class, but thank you.